morning. I'm not going to sing for you like the opening. Maybe later, who knows. I'm going to take you back to 2022, because that is the year that retail actually changed. But most people didn't realize it at the time. But I was sort of paying attention, and what I saw is there was a launch of a completely new web shop called Temu in the United States in September 2022. And we were still oblivious to this in Europe because it would take almost 9-10 months until it arrived in our shores. But I actually wrote my first article about Temu on the day it launched in the US. Why? Because I'd been watching the parent company, Pinduoduo, for a very long time. And there were already rumors that they were going to do something in the US. So the day it launched, I wrote my first article. And I've been writing reports for TechBuzz China about Temu ever since. So basically we turned this into what we call Temu Watch, where about every 2 to 3 months we basically report all of the changes and all of the updates and all of the new statistics about Temu. Because this is a company that very quickly keeps changing, and that's what I'm going to do with you today. So if you look at this slide, I'm not going to go through all of the different times with you. At the end of the presentation, you'll see a QR code. If you scan that, you'll get the handouts later today. So if you want that, you can take pictures, no problem whatsoever, but you can also get the full handouts. So what I want to stress is, if you look in January 2022, that was actually the first time that in Pinduoduo, the parent company of Temu, they had a meeting and they said, well, we're not growing so fast anymore in China. Maybe we should go abroad. Maybe we should do something with cross-border e-commerce. 9 months later, they launched the website. 9 months later. They had everything arranged, the assortment, the logistics, payment system, etc., etc. So that's China's speed. And that's something that we'll have to deal with. In February, they had a commercial during the Super Bowl in the US. And this was also the highest paid commercial during the Super Bowl ever for the youngest brand ever. Temu had only existed for about 5 months by then. So a month later, they started rolling out to English-speaking countries, and they also came our way. Now they are active in 97 countries, many more countries than Amazon is active in. Now, those of you who have seen the video that I did for a webinar earlier this year had seen the explanation of the business model of Temu. So I'm not going to discuss that in detail, but I'll give you a short summary. So basically what Temu does is they launched in September 2022 with what they call the fully managed model. Now, the fully managed model means that the only thing that a manufacturer has to do is put the goods in a warehouse of Temu, and Temu takes care of the rest. So they will do the marketing, they will decide the price, and they will ship it to customers across the world. And as we know, they mostly did that through airplane packages, small packages in airplane sent directly to the consumer. So after watching Temu for about 9 months already, when they came to the Netherlands, I finally could place my first order. And one of the things I did is I started comparing the prices on Temu with those on other websites. So I bought this cable organizer, and I looked it up on Amazon, the exact same product, about 15 euro. Then I went to Shein, because Shein also has a marketplace, and I could buy it there for 8 euro. I actually bought this product for 5.38 euro on Temu. Now, and then we think, well, this is not possible, right? This is impossible to produce a product like that for such a low price. But we actually have to realize that making things in China, even though the labor cost has been rising, is still very inexpensive. So if I go on Pinduoduo, the Chinese app of the parent company of Temu, I can buy this same product for about 1 euro. That's what it costs. And then still, that merchant makes a small margin on this product. So one of the things that we have to start doing is we keep on asking ourselves, why is everything so cheap on these Chinese platforms? But maybe we also should ask ourselves the question, why is it so much more expensive elsewhere? Because if we only think, why is it so cheap, then you also get things like, oh, it must be child labor, and there must be all kinds of problems with human rights. There are problems with the product quality. Well, that one is certainly true. But there's also a lot of myths why Temu would be able to produce at such low costs. So why is it so much more expensive? Well, for instance, if you compare it to Amazon, more than half of the sales price of Amazon actually stays in the pockets of Jeff Bezos and friends. Because a merchant needs to pay for advertising to be visible. They need to pay sales commission. Depending on the product category, it could be up to 15%. And if you want to sell to Chinese consumers that are mostly using Amazon Prime, your product has to be in an Amazon warehouse, and you have to pay for fulfillment by Amazon. So, of course, the difference is that you get it much faster, within 2 days, while with Temu you might have to wait for 10 to 14 days. So there's a difference. Then the question that people quite often ask me is, well, is Temu profitable with this fully managed model? No, they aren't. At mid-2023, this was basically their profit and loss breakdown. And you can see a couple of things. First of all, they were still pumping a lot of money into advertising because they were acquiring lots of new customers at that time. Then they were spending a lot of money on logistics because they were paying for the logistics, and the average package of Temu that they send around the world in an airplane cost them $9 on average. So another one is that they had a lot of customer subsidies. Now, when you say subsidies, people often immediately think about the Chinese government, but this is actually Pinduoduo, Temu, giving discounts to the customers to make it look like the prices are incredibly low, and they are basically buying market share. So mid-2023, they had a 27% loss with this fully managed model. Now, 1 year later, they had already reduced this to 13% loss, but they also found out that it's very, very difficult to get this model profitable because of the logistical costs involved. So what they did is they started a second model in the US in March 2024. They call that the semi-managed model. And instead of taking care of the logistics for the merchant, what Temu does is they tell the merchant, you know what, you ship it by boat to a foreign warehouse, and you also pay for that warehouse and the last mile delivery. So we don't do that anymore, you can do that, we'll give you a higher margin, but you can do that yourself. But the only thing that Temu did is they would have a list of warehouses and service providers for logistics that these different merchants could be working with. So they basically decided who to work with. So why did they do that semi-managed model? Well, for instance, first of all, to lower the logistical costs for themselves. So the second thing is they lowered the delivery time. So just like fulfillment by Amazon, they could now deliver goods within 2 to 3 days. The third thing is they were anticipating regulatory risks. They knew that lots of countries were complaining about all of these packages coming in by airplanes, so they wanted to already work on a new model. And finally, and last but not least, they were also able to now sell completely different product categories, because there's only so much that you can fit in a small package on an airplane. So when they started that semi-managed model, you immediately saw adverts on social media for much bigger products. Furniture, chairs, this is an ice maker on the left. So you cannot fit that in a package on an airplane. But you want it even bigger? Well, in the US, they started selling excavators on Temu. It's not big enough for you? You want it even bigger? How about a complete house? A foldable, removable house that you could buy on Temu for about $20,000. So this is another thing that happened with that semi-managed model. Now, they also immediately found out that with this new model, because they had brought the costs down, but they had also much better customer satisfaction, that they, within 3 months, were profitable, specifically with this model, not thinking about the fully managed model. So they became profitable with this model. But they also figured out that a lot of merchants didn't really want to use the semi-managed model because it would mean that they have to ship the goods to a foreign warehouse, lock up a lot of capital, and have a lot of risk if those products don't sell. So they had difficulties to recruit merchants for the semi-managed model. So what they did, they tweaked the fully managed model. What they said is, we will still be responsible for all of the logistics, so you only have to put it in our warehouse, but we will put it in a foreign warehouse and we will ship it from that foreign warehouse. So, and thereby, they can basically decide, well, we think that these products are going to be very popular, so we'll put them in a foreign warehouse. So, by the end of this year, for the fully managed model, they plan to do 60% of all sales from local warehouses already. So, what Temu has done since September 2022 is basically created a menu with all kinds of different operational models. The fully managed model with those forward warehouses, the semi-managed model. They also have a semi-managed model Y2, which basically means that they tell the merchant, you can ship it from a Chinese warehouse when the orders come in. So it's a bit like drop shipping. Then they also have local to local. They're very active now recruiting brands from Europe to sell locally. And they, in the US, have already started third-party marketplaces where basically the merchant, the brand, can decide for themselves the shipping, the logistics, and what the pricing will be. So they are constantly changing, and more and more they become like Amazon. Now, there's something that happened a few months ago. As you might have noticed, there's a new president in the White House. And one of the things that he did is he canceled the de minimis in America. De minimis is basically under $800, you don't have to pay import taxes on these packages that come in from China. So it's something actually that Joe Biden already prepared in August last year, but this came into effect on the 2nd of May. And the effect on Temu was disastrous. This is the effect, what you can see here. 50% of their sales evaporated, basically because they almost completely stopped the fully managed model. They didn't send any more packages on airplanes to the US. What you can also see is they pushed the semi-managed model from those warehouses in the US much more. Now, I was interviewed by CNBC about this development, and I completely disagree with the headline they put on top of it. So they basically say that Temu and Shein are having problems because of the cancellation of the de minimis. But that's incorrect, and it's very important that we know that this is incorrect, because it was not the cancellation of the de minimis that caused these problems and evaporated 50% of their sales. It's this. Since the beginning of the year, Donald Trump had been constantly increasing the import tariffs until they were, for small packages, 120% or $100 flat fee, whatever is lowest. So you can imagine that with such high tariffs, that fully managed model becomes completely unsustainable. It's not feasible anymore. So that's why Temu stopped it. So what they also did is they moved a lot of their advertising budget from the United States to Europe. And that's why you could see that in Europe, all of a sudden, we had much more Temu advertising. And it's basically like a big balloon filled with air. If you push on one side of the balloon, the air basically goes to the other side. And that's what happened with the sales. So America, year on year, in May, went down 30%. And Europe went up 60%, also because they opened up in a lot more Eastern European countries. But basically, the sales shifted from one end of the globe to the other end. Now, all of this between China and the US has been a game of chicken. Because every time Donald Trump raised the tariffs, China basically said, well, we'll do the same thing. We'll also increase them. And Donald Trump always says that he has the good cards, right? And he's got the poker face, he thinks. But he actually had to give in, and he had to fold in this game of chicken and poker. So they had a negotiation, and on the 12th of May, the tariffs came down to 30% for bulk imported goods, and for the packages on airplanes from, for instance, Temu and Shein, 54%. Now, in our research at TechBus China, we found out that Temu would be able to cope with tariffs about 50% high. They could still be running the fully managed model. So for us, it was no surprise that as soon as these tariffs came down, they reopened the fully managed model. They reopened their original business. Now, what I'm going to do is, from the last report that we published for TechBus China, Temu Watch number 9, I'm going to show some of the latest findings and insights we have about what happened after that. First of all, for pricing. Before the cancellation of the de minimis in the US, Temu's price was about 40 to 60% of the price on Amazon. After the new tariffs, after 12th of May, when the tariffs came down again, their price was about 50 to 60% of Amazon. Then for the semi-managed model from those local warehouses, it used to be 70 to 80% of Amazon. Now it's 80 to 90%. So the price difference has become smaller, but they're still cheaper than Amazon. And even at this 54 and 30% tariffs, it didn't kill Temu, and it doesn't kill Shein either. As a matter of fact, I've shown you that 50% of the business evaporated in May. By now, they're already back at about 90% of their sales volume that they had before May. So they're in a big recovery. What are their goals by the end of the year? Well, one thing is they want to bring down the share of packages that they send by airplanes. They want to have that down to only 20% in the US by the end of the year. So for those packages, they pay 54%. Then they want to have 30% from overseas warehouses for semi-managed and local to local. So basically where the merchant is responsible for those warehouses and the logistics. That should be 30%. And because these goods are imported in bulk or are already in the country, the maximum tariff there is 30%. And then they are also increasing their own local warehouses for the fully managed model. They want to have that about 50% of their total sales and only pay 30% taxes. So everybody in the US, when the de minimis got cancelled, said, hooray, this is the end of Temu. No, it's not. And that's very important. So you might be thinking, well, this is the US, so why is this important for us? So what at? Well, the thing is that we are thinking about doing the same thing. And we should realize what the potential effect or lack of effect could be. So in the European Union, for instance, they have been discussing already for a few years to also cancel the European Union de minimis by 2028. Well, even if they do that, the tariffs will be between 0 and 17%. And we have seen that even at 30 and 54%, that they could still continue to run their business. And for Europe, the goal is to have 80% of business being done from local warehouses. So by the time, even if they do it in 2026, which they now want to do, by the time that we change the regulations, it's already become mostly irrelevant because everything, 80% will already be from local warehouses. So we are too slow for China's speed. We are driving a very old car and we are being overtaken by a Chinese racing car. But the absolute biggest danger of Temu, and I see this happening all the time, is that we underestimate the effect of this. We think, oh, it's just another cheap Chinese web shop, it's another Wish, this business model is impossible. And people don't actually realize how Temu constantly keeps tweaking and changing that business model. So if you look at the plans of Temu, their own estimates, they had $60 billion in sales in 2024. Despite the problems that they've had for a couple of months in the US, they can maintain their own forecast to go to 100,000. They have adjusted their forecast for next year because they expect more regulatory problems around the world. But still, 130 billion sales, still 30% growth. What they're also doing, now that they are doing more business with local brands, is they are starting to charge for advertising also on the platform. Like I said, they become more and more like Amazon. And next year, they will be profitable. Across all of their different business models, the fully managed model, this little bit that they still do might be unprofitable, but they will be highly compensated by all of the other models. They will be profitable next year and maybe even by the end of this year. So that took Amazon 8 years. It took Temu 4 years. So And people say, but how long can they keep this up? I mean, they're pumping so much money into this. Well, you need to take a step back and you need to look at the parent company of Temu, Pinduoduo. These are the cash reserves of Pinduoduo. Despite launching Temu and pumping so much money in it, their local business, their domestic business in China is so profitable that their cash reserves keep on rising and rising and rising. So they can keep up this game for a very long time. Another thing that we need to realize is that, especially this Chinese company, Temu, is being operated like a military operation. You might be working as a staff member in the office in Shanghai, and then somebody could come to your desk, your boss could come to your desk and say, hey, you know what? I've got a new job for you because we're launching a new project in Xinjiang on the other side of the country. Pack your bags because you're leaving in 2 days. And you're starting there in 2 days. Then you might be working there for half a year, and they come back to your desk and say, you know what? We're opening Temu in a new Eastern European country. We need some staff there for a while. Pack your stuff because you're going to Eastern Europe. This is how this company operates, and they're very extremely lean and mean. Inside the company, they have said about Temu, there is no failure, only success. We must and we will succeed. And this is a company that is extremely KPI driven. People work from 9 in the morning to 9 in the evening, 6 days a week. So this is what we're up against. And what I've also shown you is that Temu basically keeps changing. They are like a Chinese chameleon. When their surroundings change, when the circumstances change, they keep changing their business model at the same time. They're still the same company, they just look a bit different until they completely look like Amazon eventually. So what do they want? They want to become number 2 in the US. They know that they cannot beat Amazon there. And they think that they will have 20 to 30% market share this year or next year in the US. And they want to become number 1 in Europe. And they know that they can do that because Europe is much more fragmented with all kinds of local players that they can simply very easily overtake. The management, the founders have said, we want to be number 2 in the US, we want to be number 2 in China, which they basically, depending on how you measure, they already are. So if you're number 2 in China, number 2 in the US, you are number 1 in the world. That is their goal. And this, what happened in China, can also happen here. Because Alibaba lost a lot of market share to 2 new players, Pinduoduo, which is Temu, and another company is Douyin. Douyin, platform Douyin, if I put the logo next to it, you'll recognize that, right? And this TikTok shop has already also arrived in Europe and will also eventually be coming at your markets. And what we see happening every time is that you have a very successful Chinese internet company that has maybe up to 1 billion consumers shopping on their app in China. Then they have such high cash reserves, like I showed you for Temu, and they will use that to buy market share at China speed across the world. And when that happens, they will push out local competitors. So my question to you is, are you ready for this kind of competition? Because this is what you will be up against, and not just Temu, because more and more is coming your way. So what we need to do, and that's something that Sun Tzu said, that's the guy that wrote Art of War, is you need to know yourself and you need to know the enemy. And if you do that, then you will not have to fear all of the battles that you have to fight. But we don't know a lot about China. So next year, what we will do, together with Virke, I will take you to China, 10 to 20 people. We will take you to China in October next year to actually see this. And I will do a lot of masterclasses like this as well. So if you want to learn more, please scan this QR code. Thank you.